everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am here with my mid-April wrap-up. I have 20 books to talk about in this wrap-up. I'm pretty sure that's the most I have ever read in just about 2 weeks, and that's mainly because I've been binging a lot of books, and I specifically binged an entire book series. So the first book that I finished in April was House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This is a YA dark fantasy horror novel. I feel like that's the best way to describe this. It is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses fairy tale that we all know and love. And essentially this story takes place on a cluster of islands. It is very much centered on the sea, as you can tell by the cover. I'm not going to go too much in detail about the plot of this one because I think this is one of those books that you should go in not knowing a whole lot. I think you'll enjoy it more that way. This is definitely a horror novel though, let me just say. This is probably one of the darkest YA books that I've ever read in terms of the horror. There's quite a bit of body horror specifically going on, so I would definitely know that going into this. I overall really enjoyed it though. The romance between Annalee, our main character, and Cassius I thought was really sweet. I also really liked how their story ended as a whole. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. I thought it was very solid. So next up after that, I binged most of the entire Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. I did do a dedicated reading vlog all about my experience reading these books, so that will of course be linked up in the cards above. I thought I would just kind of quickly show you all of the books that I read. I did not read The Duke and I, which is the first book. I've talked about this numerous times. So I just went into the Viscount Who Loved Me, and I'll quickly show you these step backs as well. This was one of my favorites of the series. I adore Kate and Anthony so much. Then we have An Offer from a Gentleman. There's that step back. One of my favorites as well. I surprisingly gave this one 5 stars. It is a Cinderella retelling. I really didn't think this was going to be much going into it, but I really loved this one. Then we have Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This is Penelope and Colin's story. Gave this one 4 stars. Then we have To Sir Philip with Love. There's that beautiful step back. One of my favorites of the series, I gave it 5 stars. Yeah, this was everything. Again, go check out that reading vlog if you want to see me just rave and rave about this one. Then we have When He Was Wicked. This is Francesca and Michael's story. Then it's In His Kiss. There's that one. This one, I'm pretty sure is my absolute favorite of the series, by the way, and I think I'm in the minority of saying that because it seems like a lot of people like this book well enough, but it's definitely not their favorite. But I adore Hyacinth and Gareth, and then Lady Danbury was pretty much a main character in this one, and it was just amazing. And then the last full book of the series is On the Way to the Wedding, and there is this stunning step back. I'm pretty sure this one has my favorite step back, but unfortunately this was my least favorite of the series, but I still gave it 3 stars. I had a good time. It just wasn't great for me. And then I did read the Bridgertons Happily Ever After, which is a bind up of second epilogues for all 8 couples, and there's also a bonus story about Violet and Edmund, who are the parents of the Bridgerton siblings, and I ended up giving this 3 stars as well. Some of the second epilogues I loved, like Kate and Anthony's. Some of them I was kind of bored by, actually. So yeah, just kind of a mixed bag overall. But overall, I did have a really fun time binging this series, and I definitely look forward to checking out more of Julia Quinn's books, specifically her Smythe Smith Quartet, which is a spin-off of this series. I think that I'm going to have a lot of fun with that series. Next up, I read The Wicker King by Kay Ancrum, which is quite a bit different from the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. This is a contemporary YA novel about our 2 main characters, August and Jack. They are best friends, I guess you would say. They develop this emotionally dependent relationship with each other over the course of the book, and Jack starts suffering from really vivid hallucinations, and things get really toxic between Jack and August for sure. This is easily one of the most unique books I've ever read, and I'm so glad I finally checked it out because I can totally see why people love Kay Ancrum's writing so much. I do want to say that Kay Ancrum herself claims that this book has a happy ending, and I'm not all that convinced that it actually does. I mean, all I'm gonna say is that I found it really hard to root for these two people to be together when it was just so toxic for them. And even at the end, I personally couldn't see how their relationship couldn't be toxic. I feel like I'm in the minority of believing that because I know a lot of people who like absolutely adore this book, gave it 5 stars. I did quickly go into the novella. I think, what is it called? Legend of the Golden Raven? That could be wrong. Obviously, a picture's over here. But this is a novella that you should read after you finish The Wicker King. Basically, this novella is from Jack's point of view, whereas this entire book is from August's point of view. This was just fine for me. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was interesting to get Jack's POV about the events that were happening in The Wicker King. But at the same time, this novella gets quite confusing at times because Jack is dealing with all these hallucinations and things like that. It's very difficult to kind of grasp onto like what's actually going on in the grand scheme of things, I guess you could say. Next up, I read The Daughter of the Pirate King and Daughter of the Siren Queen by Trisha Levenseller. This is the Daughter of the Pirate King duology. It is a YA fantasy story about our main character, Alosa. She is the captain of her own pirate ship, but her father, the Pirate King, is literally the king of all pirates in this world. And this, from page 1, both of these books were so fast-paced. Like, this is the perfect duology for you if you love like fast-paced action pirate movies. Like, you would really, really enjoy this. And it also has a really great romance as well between Alosa, our pirate queen, I guess you could say, and Raiden, who is the first mate of the captain of a rival ship. Essentially, at the very beginning of this story, Alosa purposefully gets herself kidnapped by this rival pirate crew that Raiden is a part of because she's trying to get secrets out of them. And so a romance quickly starts developing between the two of them. I mean, come on, who doesn't love a good pirate romance? Like, yes, this is YA, so obviously things don't get too steamy. I also just had a fun time with the world that this takes place in. There are some fantastical elements included. We are dealing with creatures such as sirens, and Alosa herself has a really strong connection to the sirens, which was really interesting as well. So highly recommend this little duology. I gave them both 4 stars. Next up is a book that I went into knowing that I was going to love it, and I totally did, and I totally understand the hype. That is Always Only You by Chloe Leese. This is book 2 in the Bergman Brothers series, but just like with most romance companion series, you can read these as standalones, and so this is following the Bergman family. There are like 7 siblings, I think, so in that way it kind of reminds me a bit of the Bridgerton series, but this one is about our main characters Ren and Frankie. Ren is a hockey player, and Frankie is like the social media coordinator for the hockey team that Ren plays for. And she has autism, and she also has rheumatoid arthritis. And I thought that the disability representation in this book was fantastic. I think that that is one of the many things that Chloe Leese knows how to write, and I have seen some Own Voices reviews where people have praised the representation in this book as well. So this has the Grump Sunshine trope, with Frankie, our heroine, being the grump and Ren, our hero, being the sunshiny character. He is also very much a cinnamon roll hero. I adored him from page 1. Also, I feel like no one talks about this when they talk about this book, or at least I haven't heard them say this, but this has the virgin hero trope. Oh my god, like literally when I read the sentence where he confessed to her that he was a virgin, I like had to put the book down. Like, I love that trope so much, and it's just so rare, or at least I haven't found a ton of books that have it. Like I said, I understand why people love this installment in particular so much, and I am really pumped to go into the 3rd book because it is a marriage in trouble story, which we all know at this point is my absolute favorite romance trope. Next up is a book that I unfortunately ended up DNFing, and I'm kind of sad about it. That was How to Love a Duke in 10 Days by Kerrigan Byrne. So Kerrigan Byrne is an author, a historical romance author that I have read quite a few books from at this point. This is book 1 in the Devil You Know series. I read book 2 last year. That was a miss for me. This one, I got to page 77 and I realized that it was going to be more of the same, I don't know, kind of vibe. Yes, it centers on different characters, like different main characters, but there's something about the vibe of this series in particular that just doesn't work for me. So she does write more dark historical romances, which is usually something I'm fine with. I really enjoyed both The Highwayman and The Duke with the Dragon Tattoo, which are books that are a part of her Victorian Rebel series. But then trying to dive into this series, something just didn't work for me and I just wasn't engaged, so I ended up DNFing it, unfortunately. I'm not sure if I'm ever gonna pick up another book by Kerrigan Byrne at this point, just because I've had 3 duds at this point, and usually that tells me that an author isn't for me, even though I've had 2 successes with her. Okay, next up is another book that didn't really work all that well for me, and that is These Broken Stars by Megan Spooner and Amy Kaufman. I was really excited going into this YA sci-fi trilogy because it was recommended to me because I love the Illuminae files so much. Basically, it was pitched to me as having similar vibes to that series, of course, because Amy Kaufman is also an author for that series, but also this just focuses more on the romance than the Illuminae files does. So I was really excited going into this. I'll just tell you the basic premise. We have our 2 main characters, Lilac and Tarver. They are on this ginormous spaceship that is in hyperspace, and the spaceship randomly gets jolted out of hyperspace, which causes it to crash on this nearby planet. But before it crashes, Lilac and Tarver are able to get out on an escape pod, and so they end up crash landing on this planet as well, and they quickly realize that they are the only 2 survivors of this crash, and there were like upwards of 50,000 people on this spaceship. And so now they're just trying to survive on this foreign planet. There's some very interesting mysteries going on. So for me, while the concept and the plot was very interesting, unfortunately, literally everything else, from like the characters to the romance to the pacing to the plot, was all very lackluster for me. And so by the end, unfortunately, I was just waiting for this book to be over. So I did settle on giving this 3 stars. I am not planning on continuing on with the trilogy, unfortunately. Next up is a book that was a total win for me, and that is 11 Scandals to Start to Win a Duke's Heart. So this is book 3 in Sarah MacLean's Love by Numbers series. I read book 1, which is 9 Rules to Break When Romancing a Rake, some months back. I didn't have an interest in reading book 2 just because the characters that it centered around didn't really interest me. So I decided to get book 3 and jump into it this month. And I loved this so much. I had to give this one 5 stars as well. We are following Juliana. She is Italian. She is the half-sister of the main character from the first book, who's a Marquis. And then we have the Duke of Leighton, whose name is Simon, and he is literally the polar opposite of her. She is a very passionate and brash and bold woman, whereas he is extremely straight-laced. He seemingly only cares about reputation, and so the dynamic between the 2 of them was just endlessly entertaining. There's tons and tons of chemistry between Simon and Juliana, and I just love that opposites attract. Also kind of a hate to love trope. They don't like actually hate each other, but I think it's more Simon's trying to convince himself that he hates her, so he'll stay away from her. Yeah, it was a really fun time. I enjoyed this pretty much just as much as 9 Rules to Break, even though I know that that one's definitely more of the fan favorite. I loved this one pretty much just as much. So next, I binged the entire What He Doesn't Know series by Candy Steiner. So this is a series of 3 books. So the first 2 books of the series, which is What He Doesn't Know and What He Always Knew, this is a love triangle story about our main character, Charlie. She has been married to this man, Cameron, for, I want to say, upwards of 5 years at this point. Things are just not going well in their marriage for sure. Huge trigger warning for stillbirth. Basically, we find out pretty early on in the story that Charlie prematurely gave birth to her twin sons. One of them went into the NICU for about 9 days and passed away, and one of them was stillborn. And so both her and Cameron obviously were and still are dealing with a lot of grief from that. But basically, Cameron kind of just left her on her own to deal with her grief, and so she's kind of left feeling like a shell of a person. And then Our third main character, Reese, comes into the picture. So Reese and Charlie were actually childhood best friends, and he has come back to their hometown to be a music teacher at the private school that Charlie teaches at as well. And so this turns into a very messy, dramatic, and angsty love triangle between Cameron, Charlie, and Reese. And it's truly one of those stories where you really do not know who Charlie is going to end up with at the end. I gave the first two books, which is What He Doesn't Know and What He Always Knew, 5 stars, because Candy Steiner's writing in both of these books was just so captivating and addictive, and I couldn't put these two books down. And so at the end of book 2, you find out who Charlie ends up with, and then book 3, which is What He Never Knew, is the romance of the guy she doesn't choose. So I'm not going to tell you who that is because that would spoil the ending for the second book. So this third book I ended up giving 4 stars. Unfortunately for me, the romance didn't really work all that well for me. The heroine's 21, the hero's 37. Usually that doesn't bother me, but for some reason in this story, I just wasn't a fan. To me, the hero and heroine worked better as friends than they did in a romantic relationship. I personally wasn't seeing the chemistry, really. I don't know. I keep flip-flopping about my views about this couple. However, what I loved about this is how much this story incorporated music, because I'm also a musician. And I thought that that was beautifully, beautifully done. Also, huge content warning for rape and sexual assault. That is brought up pretty much on the first or second page of this book, and it's discussed a lot throughout, so definitely know that going into it. However, I thought that Candy Steiner handled the subject matter really well. So I do overall recommend this trilogy. If you are looking for a really angsty love triangle, definitely check out this series. And I am really interested to check out more from Candy Steiner. All right, guys, we're pretty much at the end of this wrap up. I just have 2 books that I quickly want to mention. I did do a reread of The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. I finished it earlier today. This is my second time reading this book, and this is what my soul needed. So I read this for the first time back in 2019, so it's been about a year and a half, 2 years since I read it for the first time. And I forgot quite a bit of what happens in this book, actually. There are some scenes that will always live in my mind rent-free, but there was quite a few other things that I had forgotten about that it was just fun to reread. I didn't think it was possible for me to adore Ash, who is our hero, any more than I already did, but reading this book for the second time, I felt like I fell harder and faster for him. Oh my god, I love him so much, because yes, he's a damaged and scarred hero, and he has that grumpiness to him, but it's the perfect balance of grumpiness with this dry, witty sense of humor that makes me literally laugh out loud numerous times while I was reading this. And I also really love Emma, our heroine. She's just the perfect match for him. And after rereading this, it has solidified for me that this is by far my favorite historical romance of all time. So if you have not read this for some reason, what are you doing with your life? And then in terms of what I'm currently reading, I'm actually doing a reread of The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. I just listened to the first like 3 hours or so of the audiobook while I was getting ready to film. And this is another book that is one of my all-time favorite romances, and I also read it for the first time in 2019. And it's just so great being with these characters again and reading their romance. I'll probably talk about this one a little bit more in my end of the month wrap up after I actually finish my reread, but yes, I'm just having the best time with this book. All right, guys, that's going to be it for my mid-April wrap up. I hope that you enjoyed. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below telling me about some of your favorite reads of April. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!